Secret of Answered Prayers. One cold winter night, Martin sat by the window, gazing at the starry sky. Snow was gently falling on the tree branches, and the moonlight illuminated everything. He wrapped himself in a blanket, lost in thought. After a few moments, he turned to his father, who was reading the Bible, and curiously asked, "Dad, does God answer all prayers immediately?" His father smiled, closed his book, and said, "That's a great question, Martin. Come sit next to me so we can talk about it." Martin eagerly sat beside his father, waiting for his response. His father began, "Praying means talking to God. God always hears our prayers, but his answers aren't always what we expect. Sometimes he answers immediately, sometimes after a while, and sometimes his answer is different from what we ask for." Would you like to hear a Bible story about this? Martin excitedly said, "Yes, Dad, please." His father started telling him a story from the Bible. Story of David, who later became a king, prayed to God when he was young, asking him to protect him from his enemies. But God didn't remove his enemies right away. Instead, he gave David strength, wisdom, and patience to endure hardships. Years later, David became a great king and realized that God had a better plan for him all along. This shows that sometimes God doesn't answer our prayers immediately because he is preparing us for something greater. Martin thought for a moment and asked, "So if I ask God for something right now and it doesn't happen, does that mean he didn't answer my prayer?" His father placed his hand on Martin's shoulder and said, "No, my son. God always answers prayers, but his answers come in 3 ways. Yes, no, prepare yourself, and wait. If something is good for us, he gives it to us right away. If it's not good for us, he protects us by saying no. But sometimes the best things come at the right time, so he says, wait." Martin smiled and said, "So if my prayer isn't answered right away, it means God has a better plan." His father nodded and said, "Exactly, we need to trust God. As the Bible says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Proverbs 3:5. So the next time you pray, remember that God always wants the best for you. Martin rested his head on his father's shoulder and said, "From now on, if God doesn't answer my prayer right away, I will wait and trust him." His father kissed Martin's forehead and said, "Faith, my son." That night, Martin fell asleep peacefully, knowing that God always gives the best answers at the perfect time.
Lesson of the story: patience and faith in prayer. That night, Martin learned that God always hears our prayers, but his answers depend on his wisdom and love. He understood that sometimes God answers immediately, sometimes he says no for our protection, and sometimes he asks us to wait so that we can receive something even better at the right time. From then on, whenever Martin prayed and didn't get an immediate response, he didn't feel discouraged anymore. Instead, he waited with faith and peace, knowing that God knows what's best for him and when it should happen. As the Bible says, this is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. 1 John chapter 5 verse 14. So whenever you pray, remember that God always wants the best for you, even if his answer doesn't come right away.